Episode 13, The Upstanding Citizen, The Curious Case of Salmon in the Pocket. Yes, you heard me correctly. Season 2, Episode 13. The episode is dedicated to our teaching community. Podcast crew acknowledges that generalised stress can lead to dissociation behaviours and odd, bizarre, curious events can arise. Like it did in the story of salmon stuffed in the teacher's pocket in a grocery store. Stress bubbles over in funny ways. Sara discusses the God complex that might be needed to be successful in demanding roles, like the surgeons, top lawyers or professional athletes. But when does it shut off, asks Trajce. It needs to be shut off, agrees Alan. There are immense pressures in accepting job roles when the personal life is watched as closely as the professional life. Listen to the cases on some very concerning and distressing teacher experiences. This episode contains references to offensive acts, explicit or otherwise deemed to be offensive. Hello and welcome to the Why Work podcast series. You are listening to Trajce Vitkovsky, Sara Pizzell and Alan Girl.
So, Sara, sometimes people have a snap and they do crazy things, and you're aware of something that's been in the media where a teacher has done a crazy thing.
Yeah, it's in the media and it is confronting. It's not a legal case. It's just been in social media, right?
No, it's difficult social media.
That's it. It's the rapid distribution of confronting information that was likely not with consent that it was shared. But I'm hearing about it left, right, and center. And it brings to point the issue about what happens when you're supposed to be, quote unquote, an upstanding citizen, when the job that you accept is some sort of profile that you're expected to behave a certain way, even when you're outside of the workplace. And we talked about this a little bit.
Well, I think, if you engage in an activity that's not legal, if I phrase it that way, and you get plastered all over social media, it's very hard to protest.
Who knows exactly what was happening, right?
Well, there's hard to put an innocent explanation to what you see on the footage.
Could have just been to get likes on TikTok.
So simulated and not actual?
See, that's the thing.
Well, if you do that for likes on TikTok, then you've got to live with what you've put on TikTok.
Yeah, but if you want to believe that's what she's done, fine. Maybe I'm naive or just cynical.
I won't even explain the jurisdiction, but there are social media sites that show embarrassing things about events or confronting things, or even hoon drivers, and like when you rob from a store and you're an adolescent and the store puts up posters like, here's the people that have stolen from us, and these name and shame kind of thing.
Yeah, shame theory.
Now with social media, there are name and shame little channels, social media channels that do this. And this just happens to be in a regional area. And this was caught on film. And I don't know who released the security film. I guess it was the store released it to this name and shame kind of video site.
If I can sort of interrupt you there, where people are where people are displayed in a visual way, whether it be a poster on a wall or on video, and they're innocent of wrongdoing, or at least you shouldn't make a finding of wrongdoing, it's possible for lawyers to do something about that. We can shut those things down.
So maybe you can
have a crack at least at shutting them down. But where the activity is obviously not acceptable behaviour, it becomes much, much harder to shut them down.
Okay, and so that's the quotation marks, not acceptable behaviour. But hang on, what happens? It's your downtime. I'm not employed at that time. I'm not saying it wasn't my behaviour.
You wouldn't go in the Coles and get a toothbrush and stick it in your mouth.
No, I would not. No. I don't know that the comparison's exactly the same, but no, I would not. I would
you wouldn't
not
stick salmon in your pocket. Coles either.
All right, come on, Trajce.
Would you?
Salmon in the pocket.
Well, we've been talking about this all morning. Look, I'll give you a quick little diversion. And
safer than sex. All right,
it involves a teacher, and I sometimes think about the stressful situations. And in fact, this episode is dedicated or devoted to matters concerning teachers and education generally. I'm reflecting now on a matter a while ago. I was representing a kid on a graffiti charge. But I like to listen to the matters before me. It was just the ordinary police court, just a simple regulatory offence, stealing, just a simple summary matter. So the defendant in front of us, he was a teacher, a head of a physics department at a private school in Brisbane, and he was pleading guilty to one charge of stealing. And the facts were quite simple in that he had his 12 items or less red basket, he'd put his milk in bread and other things, and then he proceeded to place a packet of salmon. Rather than just simply putting it in the basket, he's peeled the packet of smoked salmon, that's thin sliced salmon, and he's discarded, or actually he's returned the empty packet back into the shelf.
I hate that when you walk past and you see shelves of empty things and you know somebody's opened it. Yes, go ahead.
Well, he's opened it fully.
Right.
And so the packet's empty. However, he's then proceeded to place the contents, namely the smoked salmon, into his right pocket. It's one of those tweed jackets, with the patches.
Sounds very much like Mr. Bean.
Pay for all the other items. It was quite Bean-esque. Paid for all the items that he had in his basket, and he's paid for it in cash, and then he's walked off, and then he was intercepted by security because they said, "What's in your right pocket?"
And they've got secret shoppers everywhere watching the secret police, whatever.
So maybe it's teachers have a lot of stress because they have to deal with large groups of children who might not all be well behaved, and maybe that stress just gets to them, and they.
Well, in part of the mitigation that was raised, there were issues around it doesn't really recall putting it in his pocket. He remembers peeling it off, but he just doesn't recall placing it in there. But there were issues around stress.
Good defence about stress, or is there the legitimacy of disassociation?
It's not.
So you're in a different
defence, but it's mitigation.
It's no excuse. However, it's important to explain to courts. But human all too human, and the facts and circumstances. So whilst no excuses, he stole.
But you can disassociate from your activity during times of intense, high, extreme stress. And I'm just asking.
That's a hard argument to run.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's a hard argument, right? That would be a defence. But that's what I'm asking. That must be the defence, the disassociation from the activity. That's
indeed, and
shocking.
I mention it because not to necessarily trivialise it per se, even though the facts are so bizarre. But I mention it because the word stress, the facts were colourful as they could be, but the fact that issues relating around work and stress in his capacity as the head of the physics department of that school, it just, that story stays with me because in recent times there have been quite a number of high profile cases, or just cases full stop, in the courts around generalised anxiety and depressive disorders involving teachers because of the nature of the work they do.
And so there we go back to the work systems. There's a couple of things here. It's can the work system be blamed for creating that environment and circumstance that could trigger such extreme stress responses so that something like your inhibitions dissolve? You're in extreme times of stress, fatigue, for example, end of week, Friday night, things like drinking behaviours increase, things like impulsivity are known to increase, online shopping purchases late at night, and promiscuity are known to increase when you're extremely fatigued and overworked. It's almost like eroding any of those the id, ego, superego, those boundaries. You go back to that primal id. You just go, oh, stuff it, it's like your inhibitions just dissolve.
Well, I think there's so much focus on the moment on psychosocial issues, and we're talking about that in terms of the larger environment and the impact that has on workers. And so the answer to your question is yes. I think employers are really being compelled, and they're legally obliged now, to think about psychosocial hazards and what risks arise out of that.
If you think about a teacher,
the Roberts case.
So you have a student who's in your space, or a student chasing you with a baseball bat. How would you categorise that?
And that's real. That's the real case.
Yeah.
So a teacher has been chased,
not struck,
by
not
a child.
Hit.
No, but the child was attempting to hit the teacher with the baseball bat
Chase,
in her head.
Baseball bat. and it was triggering. So what would you think of that? Is that a systems design issue? Is that something really, it's top down? We're not just dealing with that particular school and its playground?
What were any of the early indicators and tell us about the case?
Alan?
So the incident with the baseball bat was the worst of the incidents, or at least the most graphic, but there were a number of incidents. I think there might have been half a dozen stress events. And it's an interesting case for a number of reasons, but yeah, she suffered PTSD as a result of that incident. You were confronted there with a question of what should the employer do, but I think there's lots of opportunities in a school environment to manage the children. I mean, isn't that what education's all about?
Yeah.
And it can be difficult and challenging because of the number of teachers you have, the ratio of teachers to students, the type of students you had. But this was an inner Brisbane suburb. It wasn't a difficult suburb. It was.
And let's make it clear, we're not dealing with a 21-year-old straight out of uni teaching student on probation. We are dealing with experienced, seasoned, across the school spectrum teachers. So we're dealing with people who are adept at their job, having these disorders as a consequence of the workplace environment.
And I think one of the things that came out of this case rather graphically is that when something like this happens, where you have an incident where a worker, being the teacher, is placed under enormous stress, you need to stop at that point and say, well, how did we get here and what do we need to fix it?
That's what I'm asking. What are all these little lead indicators?
And but unfortunately, in this case, that didn't happen for some reason or another. At the school level, the situation wasn't managed as well as it could be. She put in a workers' compensation claim. That was resisted. That went off to the Workers' Compensation Authority, which is work cover, and then they refused her claim. She appealed it, went off to the Workers' Compensation Regulator. The appeal to the regulator was refused, and then she went to the Industrial Relations Court and Industrial Relations Commission.
It was the Commission, yes.
Commission, and it was Commissioner Dwyer, I think.
Indeed, yep.
And he ruled in her favour, but in the process of that, her application to Dwyer was contested as well. So we've got multiple layers here where her claim for workers' compensation has been resisted. The argument was, which was really a spurious argument, was that it was management action that caused her PTSD, but there's nothing in, a student chasing you down the corridor with a baseball bat. There's nothing about that is management action.
Indeed, Alan, and the case is worthy of a read in its entirety, but if you're all time poor, I love that expression, time poor. If you're all time poor, can I just take our listeners to paragraph 99? 5 lines sums up the whole case, and I love it. And I'm going to read it out. I'm going to read it out.
Tell us about it.
This is worth a listen. All right, guys, settle in and listen to this. The objectively uncontroversial facts of this matter have always been that Ms. Roberts was exposed to multiple traumatic events during her time as a teacher between 2007 and 2019. By September 2019, an appropriately specialised medical practitioner had diagnosed Ms. Roberts as having sustained, I emphasise, sustained PTSD as a, I emphasise, direct consequence of those traumatic events. That appears an objectively analysed scenario. Sustained traumatic events. So you are right about the spurious observation.
What's really interesting in this case is that all those entities that resisted her claim, they're all within the one government department, which is the Education Department, which is also charged with the responsibility of administering the legislation and now bringing into force the psychosocial code of practice. So it's not easy, and but what is easy, it's very easy to become diametrically opposed to the person who's saying they're suffering stress.
Yeah.
The regulator has done that. The regulator, instead of the regulator saying, okay, we've got to look at the psychosocial hazards, we need to unpack this and solve it and find solutions, it went the complete opposite direction and said, no, we've got to resist this claim.
And to be specific though, Sarah, She was not only threatened with violence multiple times, but was chased by a student and had a baseball bat swung menacingly close to her head. That's straight out of paragraph 102.
Yeah, significant. So,
pretty dramatic.
So going back to those other cases we were talking about, the instances where the behaviours of the teachers in public are called into question, and we assume they're expected to have a certain profile of moral standing, even outside of their job roles, right? Reputational, upstanding kind of citizens in the world, right? A lot of loaded expectations. There lies open a chance to come back and say, well, the system of work has not protected me. I've been exposed to psychological harms. And here are just, my behaviors are a symptom of that system of work. So question mark, I'm not saying in those two instances we've described that is a direct linkage. I'm just putting it out there as a hypothetical, purely as a hypothetical, because in Australia there's more than 10,000 claims, serious psychological injuries made every year. And I believe the stats are that it's increased 50% increase in the last 5 years throughout the pandemic has been significant through that, right?
Yeah,
and now we've got economic downturn, so you're going to have more stressors added to this, right?
Yeah. We've also had in the media quite a bit of talk just recently about what's alleged to be bad behaviour by a female PE teacher. And I'm certainly not an apologist for people who engage in bad behaviour, but if you create a very stressful environment where there's lots of psychosocial hazards which are translating into risks and then injury, you're going to get more bad behaviour.
It bubbles over.
It bubbles up.
We talked about road rage, season 1, road rage, right?
In many respects, when you think of, that's right, the examples with the fish in the pocket and the store, these are all bizarre and obscure scenarios, but clearly
it is very strange. Who would eat salmon that's been in someone's pocket?
Well, John West would reject it for a start. But look, again, extraordinary, a person of standing. You can say without a shadow of a doubt that teachers are indeed frontline workers. When you put it in the context that we're presenting here, this is frontline stuff, and every day, who knows what's going to happen in the playground or the school classroom. So I can see where the level of stress would be so heightened. Perhaps people may do some crazy things or extraordinarily unusual things in the course of their job. But
things that they wouldn't normally do.
I've even heard about detectives, think about forensics and people having to investigate murders. I've heard from families of these detectives that will say these guys sometimes make a joke that they hope is offline because it really is just a veneer of protection for their own mental health and sanctity of their own well-being to just give them a moment, a reprieve from always being heavy, deep, dark, and heavy stuff that they have to deal with all the time. And yet, if that were captured, some of the jokes that they make, captured online, then that's that front page media. How horrific! How could they make a joke about this? But it's their own psychological protections. Now, I'm not defending something in media right now by any means. This is just hearing from the other side from family members.
It's funny, you're right, and I've just flashed back to MASH, that great TV series MASH, but I also think about sometimes when people go on about surgeons and God complex and their rudeness and their arrogance and they swear like troopers, if you stop and think, here you have somebody presenting an emergency ward with blood everywhere. I don't know, but my point is I couldn't do it. I can understand if there's going to be effing words being thrown around, expletives.
I've worked with surgeons. I have healthcare management kinds of roles that I've dealt with, and from what I saw, anecdotally, that sometimes you needed that level of confidence, the Mighty Mouse, here I come to save the day song, that you needed that to believe in yourself. That self-efficacy had to be created so that they actually felt that there was, the wind beneath their wings, right? Yeah. So that they could solve this complex problem. And they had to build themselves up. It was like a like a sports team ready to go. We can win. And so without that, they might have doubted themselves. So it's about the boundary of when that's switched on and when that's switched off, when the humility comes back.
I understand and accept that sort of thing happens, and you get a bit of that happening in the legal profession.
You get it in academia, everything.
Yeah, when it goes wrong and they have to come back down.
Can they come back down?
That's something that I think maybe we're being encouraged to look at by the changes in the law, and maybe we have to start thinking about, if our workers, our professional workers get hyped up, and
you see with athletes all the time, athletes have to hype themselves up.
I'm feeling particularly combative today. I'm feeling particularly teaching. I'm going to have a go at you this time, Alan. Okay, here's the thing. We've got the new code. It's coming in. The relevant amendments the 1st of April.
Agitator there.
Here we go. This is a classic. We'll use the surgeon scenario, and this person is swearing like a trooper. Words that we probably haven't even thought of.
Hey, I was there with the Asphalt boys, so go on.
Yeah, so we get Asphalt scenario. So we have got extreme, derogatory, perverse, just really inappropriate swearing, right? And somebody, let's just say...
like Sara.
A bit like Sara. Somebody like Sara.
Once,
in the surgery.
for the record.
So, and yes, here we go. Sarah the surgeon. My main artery's been severed. I've nicked it using a Stanley knife because I was cutting in the wrong direction. Don't ask me why, but I've done it. And I am clearly in a bad way. Now, here's the thing. Trajce is the patient. I have absolutely no issue, and I don't give a you-know-what if, for example, perhaps one of the other assistants, this is why I'm really going to push this, why one of the assistants, perhaps the nursing assistant or one of the orderlies, takes absolute offence at the foul-mouthed surgeon and then makes a complaint because of the attitude and the language.
So, sorry, you're saying you would not care?
I wouldn't care.
If it's your body, just fix the damn body.
In fact, if he started swearing at me, calling me is an absolute, what, for using a Stanley knife, I'd be saying, yes, God, just keep me alive.
Just keep going. So use whatever adrenaline fuel you need.
This is the issue I've got. I would be outraged. In fact, I would be enraged if somebody invokes the code of conduct in a scenario like that.
Interesting.
But that's just me because I want to stay alive.
So I'm in the middle.
Did you see what I'm getting at? Do you see what I'm getting at?
I hear you saying, Trajce, that the adrenaline may help that surgeon, and you're saying use whatever it takes. Right?
You got it.
Okay.
So,
but I'm in the middle of editing, finalising a manuscript for the Workplace Insights series. Taylor and Francis. Healthcare Insights is our 3rd book. And there is a story. We managed to get consumer stories in this book, and this story is anonymized, and they got their lawyer's approval to go ahead and submit this. And this is a story of somebody who went in for something fairly routine in their colonoscopy, and it didn't go right, and then it worsened, and the person needed abdominal surgery, so imagine, I'm just putting some context, imagine the surgeon swearing. It's stressing out the rest of the surgical team. It causes, it causes the anesthesiologist to make an error. And in this case, it was a different lead-up scenario, but in this case, the patient, mid-operation, woke and remembers. So anesthesiology not administered. There were system of work factors in this case. So now I'm going to go back and unpack what you've just said to say, hang on a minute, what happens if that surgeon swearing created an environment that triggered stress responses among surgical team members and a mistake was made?
That's it. See?
So
what do you reckon, Alan?
So let me go back to what I said before, which was I'm not an apologist for bad behaviour, and bad behaviour has to be corrected, and sometimes bad behaviour has to be punished. But I think it's also important for us to rise above that and not stay focused on that and say we've got a whole workplace that we have to manage, and our workers go home, and we don't want our workers going home and being caught up in domestic violence situations.
No.
Absolutely not. So we want our workers going home in the same condition when they arrived at work.
Actually, I'm gonna give you another vision for that statement. I always argue to workplaces that they want their workers to go home in an enhanced, a better state.
Wouldn't that be nice?
So that the workplace is the construction of health and well-being.
And so they actually enjoyed coming to work and felt fulfilled at the end of the day.
They feel fulfilled. They have aspirations, they have identity, they have social connection, that they feel that they're learning, that they're inspired to do more. So I don't want them to go home the same way. I want them to be improved, if you will, to feel like life enhanced.
So, umpire Alan.
Umpire Alan.
Umpire Alan.
I'm far from.
Actually, I think I was the umpire this time. You were going after Alan earlier.
No, umpire Alan. No, I've changed my mind.
Okay.
Umpire Alan. I've turned my pleaded guilty. Yeah. Umpire Alan. Using the two case scenarios, you've got the stress being caused by the profanity and the profuse language in Sarah's scenario.
Hypothetical.
It's hypothetical compared to my hypothetical of just absolute drama. This person is going to bleed out, and the surgeon, who is well known for using very colourful language, saves that person's life. But that's his operation. That's his modus operandi. He gets heightened, and someone's taken offence to the language. I mean, should the surgeon in my scenario be punished because of his attitude and his foul mouth?
The surgeon's behaviour has to change. It must change. The question of punishment's a difficult one, but if that's what's needed to change the behaviour, then maybe yes. And also the question of punishment's always a difficult one because maybe the patient needs for there to be punishment.
But patients
or the nurse needs there to be punishment.
It's the colleague who took absolute offence because enough's enough.
Yeah.
She or he has put up with this person's attitude, but I have nothing but praise.
But in terms of...
Well, we're seeing this play out in the media right now, aren't we?
Yeah.
In terms of our aspirational goals...
Brain surgery.
Because these are vexed issues.
But we're dedicating season 3 to more healthcare cases.
It's about the code. There'll be some difficulties in people, A, getting their heads around it, and B, applying
implementing
Implementing with heightened fact scenarios like this. So
what if an astronaut starts spit swearing, you know?
In a confined... what was it, a confined space?
Or a restricted space. Well,
but can't you just turn the radio off?
No, if that was the case, I'd just say E.T. phone home.
Oh, burn. But we were talking about teachers. Teachers. So, and you had another case about a teacher who help me out here, who had psychological harm or reported this.
But for different reasons. It had nothing to do with students swinging baseball bats.
Okay.
Indeed, it had to do with the way in which her superiors communicated and otherwise consulted, close brackets, and dealt with the issue. So essentially, the person was treated as an anti-vaxxer when there was a furthest thing from it. But
during the pandemic?
During the pandemic, so really heightened state. But this particular case, it's in the matter of Diane Uzanovska, a very experienced teacher, commenced teaching later in life, but nevertheless, 17 years of full-time, seasoned teaching work. Unfortunately, this person developed a psychological condition because of the way in which the education department handled and managed her concerns about and her queries about to be vaccinated or not to be vaccinated. So heightened state, health directives were being issued, people were being mandated to get vaccinated.
A lot of confusing information in the media at the time. That was very confusing time.
It wasn't about...
And to be fair to the education department, and we were really forced to make very quick decisions. I don't doubt that in this case they've mishandled it, but, you know, it wasn't something where we had 10 years to prepare.
Look, and mining saw this with BHP. There were concerns about whether they consulted workers in the way that this unfolded, right?
And indeed.
Okay.
Whilst she is not understood to be an anti-vaxxer, the applicant says her personal values were to oppose the directive. Personal, I emphasise the word personal, these are her personal values, so therefore the applicant brings a claim for workers' compensation benefits by reason of incapacity for employment as a result of distress and panic attack caused by what is pleaded as bullying and harassment in the workplace. All because of the way and the manner in which this information, or perhaps misinformation or miscommunication, call it what you will, was handled by her superiors. Okay. So forget about the subject.
So important to get that right, isn't it?
In work design, we're now talking about your communication strategies and your change management strategies. Okay, organizational work design, change management, and communication strategies.
Talk about that.
So, well, I'm just saying that that's kind of how I would contextualize what you're explaining to me, that it wasn't the vaccination issue. You're saying the concern raised was that there wasn't adequate consultation, there wasn't adequate change management stepwise support about how to make sure people felt comfortable with the directives that they were receiving.
That's right.
And the communication either wasn't clear or was confusing or gave rise to misinterpretation, gave rise to maybe there was communication where there was a formal communication.
Yep.
And informally, different ways of suggesting things that didn't align with organizational values. And I'm finding that happens a lot.
And consultation involves listening. It's
Yes.
not just talking, it's listening.
Well, here's the thing. So this person had vaccines for other things. It was definitely not an anti-vaxxer in the ordinary sense of the meaning, or in that pop cultural sense of the meaning. It's really about words, 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 again, to quote Eliza Doolittle. Words, 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 and it's the way in which you sequence these words. So this is pretty much how the communications were. If staff are found to be or suspected of being in breach of these guidelines, then investigation and disciplinary action may, in emphasis, may be undertaken by the department, including termination of employment.
Oh, so that sounds like a
that's
threat.
right. So the
Okay, so that
bazookas
sounds
are out.
like a threat to me.
So the bazookas are out right at the outset, really heavy-handed, and of course, you know, suddenly, and plus all the Zoom sessions and the suggestions that this person isn't playing,
Okay,
playing
so
ball.
do you remember in season when we talked about how the pandemic made what was traditionally a very safe type of workplace, like the office environment, suddenly thrown into disarray, and there was that VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And if you have a very...
What's that again?
The VUCA, babe.
Yep.
VUCA, the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity around work that can create a lot of stress and anxiety. And if you have a poor
That's right.
communication or change management strategy, then suddenly what was safe no longer feels safe. So
But here's the
a
thing.
school teacher.
Even if that phrase, whether it's heavy-handed or not, but even in isolation, you might be able to objectively assess the merits of it. But the thing about communication is it is a fluid and dynamic process. It's not just a static, this is what I've said.
a mandate. It's not just a mandate.
So let's just say that paragraph was fine in itself, but we add now to the mix this. In another occasion, there was a Zoom meeting and the curriculum planning around the planning, but she felt belittled because she was spoken to in a condescending tone by the assistant principal. Now, add further to the mix, constantly being called up, are you getting vaccinated? So that the constant sort of haranguing, if you like, and that made her feel anxious and harassed and disrespected.
This sounds like what happened to you last night.
Oh, it was, yes, and we're talking about for another. Oh, yes, we'll save this one for the health writers. Yes, I was ganged up on by my son and my wife. Yes, indeed, but it's okay. It was for the greater good. It was a utilitarian.
I haven't seen that argument in the courts. The greater good argument.
No, it was a utilitarian. It was a
family
Jeremy
gang up.
Bentham all over again. But anyway, yes, that made me feel anxious. But in any event, in this particular scenario, all of these things, all of these factors, these concomitant factors, all coming in, converging. I've been hanging out to use convergence in this series, and I finally got to use it. So it was a convergence of, I guess, misaligned or malaligned communicative sequences.
Not conflating issues.
Conflating. Why not?
Well, no, you shouldn't
more
conflate
C words,
issues.
boys. More C words.
Session. As done by any stretch of the imagination, there are indeed cases.
So what, you haven't told us yet what happened in the end.
Well, wait, there's
okay,
more.
all right,
So you've got these a heightened state, you've got lockdowns, so suddenly you start
Yeah, but
shooting
Trajce, I want to know what happened
What
in
do
the end.
you think happened? Do you think she got...
I reckon you're setting us up to hear that she's successful.
Yes!
Yeah, communication. What about when there's a
Yep.
disconnect from that formal communication and the unspoken communication or the policy? So
The issue simply was the way in which the communications were
Relayed.
Yes,
Communicated.
relayed.
Oh, right.
So it's a really important takeaway. So forget about the anti-vax rhetoric, forget about the stuff that I talked about with respect to public health orders. It's about words, words, words. So this case isn't necessarily about teachers, it's not necessarily about health, it's not necessarily about COVID. It is about what you said, Sarah. How are you going to effectively and properly, in this case, design a proper communicative approach?
Right.
It's about communication. And I think we've lost a lot of that ability. We talked about that in season
candor.
one. That
Yeah, candor.
So I would have handled this differently. I wouldn't have shot off that. I wouldn't have said, right, this is it. This is the public health. Do it or else.
On our website, we need to add definitions to all these C words. Candor being one.
There's another one. See, remember, I did
Collaborate.
In fact, I was
Consultate.
I was complicit. Another C word. I did introduce.
Conflate.
Remember in season one, I did introduce the C word, and you and
Candor. Yeah, absolutely.
I did start this off. So this is just an ordinary evolution. We've gone from candor to cunning.
Take a break.
All right. We hope you enjoyed that episode of Why Work. You've been listening to Trajce, Sara and Alan. And if you'd like to know more about some of the things we've talked about today, please subscribe, and we'd be more than happy to provide you with information, names of cases and other things that may interest you. Please be aware that none of the matters we've talked about today should be construed as legal advice or any other type of advice. We're just here to talk about all things related to work. See you next time.
So beware, you're dealing with the deadly serious, mysterious audio manuscript of a team ready and equipped.
Here we have in the media, Trajce. No? No.
If somebody lose our support. No.
It's in the media.
No, they can do no wrong. They can do no wrong.
That's okay. There are subtle ways of doing these things.
Cut.
We'll use a lot of these off.
All right. We'll leave
Can I just say this?
Okay, finish this.
No, Sarah, you're too cheeky.
All right.
You're an agent provocateur.
Yeah. Did you like? Did you like how I got?